Hey folks, you people on YouTube can see me. We'll wait for the Facebook people to come in. Thank you for being here. California, San Francisco, you guys aren't close to each other, but you're both there. New Mexico. I was just in New Mexico, my first and probably only time in the state because I got crazy sick with altitude sickness. I was miserable. Chicago, it was pretty though, what I could see when I got out. Grand Rapids, Michigan, Fairbanks, Alaska. Josh Johnson has a hilarious bit about Grand Rapids, by the way. Pittsburgh, and here we go with the Facebook people. How are you? I've missed Danny, but I bet she's here. And I'll get right into this because we're trying to make these shorter. And we have just brought on board a young woman who has been cutting these videos into quite small videos for YouTube. I have not yet seen them. I only just noticed they were there today. But if you're interested in seeing some of the specific things I talk about, she's been very good about that. One of the things that I thought was useful was when I talked the other day about what cryptocurrency really is, because I find so much of this stuff is, just hard to wrap your mind around. And let me start actually there. I have said to you before, and I will keep on saying it, this summer is going to be rough. And you could already feel that that's the case, at least I can, that, the news today, for example, there's a lot going on, but it's very hard to untangle. It's very muddy and to see what the different pieces are and how they tie together. And it feels very overwhelming. And I'm figuring if it feels overwhelming to me, who spends my life digging into this stuff, it probably feels overwhelming for other people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we get toward the end of this 30 minutes and how to sort of resist that and to push back against it. But if you're feeling lost, I think you're in pretty good company. All right. So one of the things that almost everybody asked about was the budget reconciliation bill that the Republicans are trying to get through Congress to get to Donald Trump's desk to sign. And there are a bunch of pieces about the budget reconciliation bill, which they have called that's actually in the title, the big, beautiful bill. The word one might be in there too. I haven't read it recently, which is obviously they picked up Trump's word for it or phrase for it and made it the title of the bill, which says a lot of things about where the Congress is right now, the Republican Congress is right now. But it's important to remember that this bill has everything in it that is on the wish list of Republicans. So it's kind of the whole kitchen sink. And that there are a lot of pieces in it that are generally quite unpopular and that are, some of them were stripped out of the bill when Democratic representatives pointed them out and sort of made fun of the Republicans for putting them in. Things like, for example, tax break on tanning beds, So there's a lot of things in that budget reconciliation bill. But one of the things to remember is that budget reconciliation is one of a very small number of bills that cannot be filibustered, which is why the Republicans are throwing everything in there. They want to be able to get it through under budget reconciliation with a simple majority vote. And so there's a lot of stuff in there. And now there's a lot of pieces to it that are now in front of the Senate that mean it's not going to be smooth sailing there. But let me explain what some of those are. First of all, the bill itself explodes both the deficit, which is the difference between how much revenue the Treasury takes in every year and how much it pays out. It's going to explode the deficit, and it's also going to explode the national debt, which is the accumulation of all those deficits. So today, for example, I think it was today, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said this is going to take on the deficit and we're going to fix the deficit. And that's just a flat up lie. I mean, that's just simply not the case. The bill explodes the deficit. And for those people who are concerned about the deficit and the debt, they're not happy with this. And that includes, crucially, the bond market. And the bond market has been reacting quite badly to this bill. And as you know, that Moody's downgraded the U.S. credit from a AAA rating to AA1 rating, which says they too are very worried about this idea of extended deficits and increasing the debt without any way to pay it off. And this is not actually something I was going to talk about today, but I just can't resist throwing it in every time I talk about the debt and the deficit. Until 1981, when we ran deficits and we were concerned about the debt, we did the obvious, which was to raise taxes, and on the people who could afford it. And we have done the opposite since 1981. We have been slashing taxes on the wealthy, and that also is in this bill. It slashes taxes for the wealthy and for corporations, and it actually costs money for the poorest Americans, and it dramatically cuts services. So one of the things that you're going to hear repeatedly, and already are, is people like House Speaker Mike Johnson, a Republican of Louisiana, saying, well, we're not cutting Medicaid. That's a lie. We're not cutting Medicaid. In fact, they are dramatically cutting Medicaid. But their argument is they are only cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. And you'll see the same thing over cuts to Social Security. And by in that case, they're not actually making the cuts yet. What they are doing is they're making it so difficult for people to jump through the hoops to get Social Security, and they're doing the same thing with Medicaid, that there's just going to be fewer people enrolled. People are going to lose their health insurance because they can't figure out the paperwork. So this is actually a dramatic set of cuts to Medicaid and to supplemental nutrition assistance programs known as SNAP, which are the modern version of food stamps, which actually have a really interesting history in the United States. I should write about that. So there are dramatic ways in which this budget is this budget reconciliation bill is the single biggest redistribution of wealth from poorer Americans to richer Americans. And that's a way to think about it. So you have asked what will happen in the Senate. Well, the Senate is not as full of MAGAs as the House is, but they do want those tax cuts. So they have an interest in getting the bill through. Whether they're going to put all the right-wing MAGA stuff in it is another question. But you've asked about the Senate parliamentarian, and the Senate parliamentarian is the person who determines whether or not a piece of legislation seems to be following the rules of the Senate. And the Senate parliamentarian, people tend to defer to the Senate parliamentarian. It's an office that was created in 1935, and they have increasingly relied on the Senate parliamentarian. The one who is there now has been there since 2012. But the Senate parliamentarian would look at this measure and would almost certainly strip out any piece of it that was not associated with the budget, because the whole point of a budget reconciliation bill is that everything in it has to be related to the budget. So she would probably say these pieces have to go. And the trick here is that she is not a judge or anything. She's sort of the appointed arbiter, I guess. And the Senate can overrule her. And that's quite rare. At least it's been quite rare in the past, but the Republicans did it last week not over this particular bill, over a different bill. So the thing I think to remember when you deal with the Republican Party right now is that they always expand power. Whatever it takes to expand their power, they do that. And I would expect that they will continue to do that. And you can see how they have gamed the system really since the 1990s to get more and more power into their own hands. And the Democrats don't do that. They do gerrymander in a few states, but they have not done anything near like the Republicans have tried to do. And in fact, if you remember during Biden's term, certain people tried to get the Senate to overturn the parliamentarians' rulings, and the Democrats wouldn't do it. And again, the Republicans have done it within the last week. I would not lay my money on the Republicans refusing to overrule the parliamentarian. They're talking about how we didn't really do it, and we don't really want to do it, but that's basically what they did last week. So don't hold your breath on that one. And you did also ask about contempt and what the ruling is on contempt in the bill. And that is, yes, an attempt to shield the Trump administration. It says you have to put up a bond before you sue for something that will go to contempt. And that would essentially, and it has to be done before that happens. So that, and I believe it's retroactive. So that would take care of the three different judges who are currently looking at whether or not the Trump administration is in contempt. So that's in there right now. And that's certainly something to speak up about. So the last question you asked about that is if Democrats take power back, can they get rid of the measures that are in the budget reconciliation bill? Absolutely. But obviously, this is designed to provide funding for this past year. It is what it is, and then they have to do it every year. So so that's where we stand with that. Now, you also asked about Harvard and what's going on with Harvard. And here's something that I'm going to sound really scary for a while. And I'm sorry about that, but I think we have to face what's here. And that's that, as I wrote the other night, the MAGA Republicans are trying to destroy education in America. And they've said so. This is not me, having a tinfoil hat and saying, oh, there's something terrible out there. J.D. Vance has said that the universities are the enemy. The professors are the enemy. And he wants to do what has been articulated by some religious leaders as taking down the main pillars of society, because they believe that those pillars of society have been corrupted by what they call liberalism. Now, let me back up a little bit here. We're first with the pillars of society. That's business, that's education, that's culture, that's religion, obviously, that's government, that's the media, and I'm afraid I've forgotten the seventh one. But they have these pillars that they want to destroy because they believe they have been infiltrated and corrupted by what they call liberalism. Now, once again, liberalism, if you're listening to me, you're a liberal, even if you're a Republican. Liberalism is just the idea that what the government should do is it should protect the rights of individuals. That's liberal, the idea of freedom, liberal. And in the United States, liberal meant keep government small because they worried about an oppressive government squishing individuals. And under Theodore Roosevelt at the turn of the last century, who was a Republican, by the way, that definition flipped so that in order to protect the individual, people like Theodore Roosevelt and the progressives believed you needed a strong government to hold back corporations, is what he was really concerned about, who were, destroying people because they could do whatever they wanted. They didn't have minimum wages. They didn't have safe factory floors. They didn't have any of that stuff. So when they talk about society being corrupted by liberalism, what they are talking about is the modern government that went into place beginning in 1933 under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and then got dramatically expanded under Republican President Dwight Eisenhower beginning in 1953. That's the idea that the government has a role to play in regulating business, providing a basic social safety net, promoting infrastructure, and protecting civil rights. And I'm going to add a fifth leg there, a fifth something there. And that's that people who believe in this protection of individuals also believes in a foreign policy that promotes those values in other countries as well. So what the MAGA Republicans are articulating now and are trying to do is to get rid of this government by tearing it down to the dirt level. If you know the word raze, R-A-Z-E, this is what I think of when I think of the word R-A-Z-E, raze, just clear cutting, but not even leaving the stumps, just going straight down to the dirt. So there's nothing there. And the attacks on Harvard are part of that, because what they want to do is they want to get rid of all these existing pillars and rebuild them as Christian nationalism. That's the Project 2025 people. The tech bros have a different vision in mind. And I think I've talked about both of those. But the attacks on Harvard then are about getting rid of higher education. And, it didn't start with Harvard. It actually started with the New School in Florida, where Christopher Rufo went in and decided to get rid of this university the way it was, and to get rid of all the these sort of programs that they had there, and replace them with big football, and replace them with what they considered, sort of a good, solid education, which is really quite right wing. And if you've been watching this at all, they essentially destroyed the school altogether. And then, of course, they put what's his name? Was it Ben Sass in charge of the Florida universities? And he got in incredibly hot water for basically being, giving great jobs to his friends who never showed up, and so on and so forth. But so this idea is not to Harvard first. But Harvard, of course, is the crown jewel in this university image. I won't say necessarily the university system. The universities in the United States have been the best in the world. And somebody wrote today, I think it was George Conway wrote today, this is crazy that universities are actually, if you're worried about the balance of trade, American universities bring in tons of people from other countries, and they also produce extraordinary amounts of innovation. And they're really, really high producing institutions and an economic sector. So why on earth would you kill them? And let me just unpack that a little bit. You may not know, if you're not in higher education, that foreign students pay full ride. Almost no American students do. So foreign students who come in, paying full tuition, full room, full board, which I think is about $126,000 a year at Harvard. They can turn around the universities. That's what balances the university's books, and then they can turn around, as Harvard does, and offer anybody whose family makes less than $100,000 a year free everything. If you're less than $200,000, I think it's free tuition, but you have to pay room and board. So basically, they're subsidizing American universities. So by getting rid of them, which it was first an attack on Harvard, and now apparently the State Department says it's not doing any student interviews as of today, but of course that's being challenged in court. They're ripping the economics out from under those universities. And similarly, I read somebody on a MAGA board saying, well, why are we giving money to Harvard anyway? And listen, all my upper degrees are from Harvard, by the way. And I would be the first to say there are many reasons to have a beef with Harvard. And that's why one of the things I say is Harvard is just an astonishing school. We have a lot of astonishing schools in the United States, which would be an interesting thing to talk about someday. But the idea that somehow the government is doing a favor to universities by funding their research has the equation exactly backward. What the system we developed after World War II was that rather than having a government having to find good scientists and hire good scientists and then keep them past their productive years, I hate to say it, the system we developed was that the universities would hire researchers and the postdocs and all the people you need to be in those labs, and the universities would sort of handle a lot of the overhead and a lot of the different aspects of hiring those people. And the government could sort of parachute in and get the best of the best every year or for every experiment. So instead of saying, oh yeah, here's Jane again or Joe again, we're just going to have to keep funding them, even though at this point they're just playing tiddlywinks in their lab. I exaggerate, but you know where I'm going with that. Instead, every year, the government gets to say, okay, who's doing the cutting edge? Who's the best out there? And they apply for grants, and those are peer reviewed repeatedly. And, they're very, very competitive. They're very hard to get. So instead of having to manage everything with overhead, the government sort of parachutes in and says, yeah, we like that project. We want to hear more about that. Here's some money. And then if it doesn't pan out, or if they decide they don't like the way it's going, they can pull that back. It's actually a system that benefits everybody. It certainly benefits the American people. But the idea that somehow that the government is doing a favor to these labs has the story exactly backward, that in fact the universities are doing a real favor to the government by maintaining these labs with scientists who are at the peak of their powers, and they don't have to be supported for the rest of their careers. So by going after Harvard, they are, I think, deliberately trying to destroy universities and replace them with the kind of education they think is good for Americans. And that, of course, is a religious-based education, one without apparently Black studies or women's studies or indigenous studies or any of the things that actually make up American society. Their vision of the world is very much one of white males. And that's just never been the way that it's just never been the way the world worked. So, aside from how you feel about it politically or anything else, it's we can't understand how the world works if we ignore the majority of the people in it. It's not a valuable study. And one of the things that I always think about when we talk about the history of enslavement and the way people used to talk, for example, about um, John C. Calhoun's plantation, focusing on John C. Calhoun. He didn't do very much. The people who made the economy and the society and the religion and all aspects of that community work was everybody but him. So erasing them then was a problem, and certainly erasing them now is a problem because we can't understand how the world changes unless we study the people in it. And that's what I do for a living, right? So that's where we're going with Harvard. I think Harvard is pushing back. It's very hard for a lot of people to push back because they're not actually canceling they're doing it in such a vague way. It's hard for universities to know if they've lost the money or not, and they're trying to get it back. And it's actually Josh Marshall at Talking Points Memo is on that. And it's hard for people to push back. All right, so some things you didn't ask about, but that are very important that I wanted to put in here. The first is the Department of Government Efficiency. Theoretically, Elon Musk has left it. That's ridiculous. In fact, what he has done is he has embedded his operatives throughout the US government, and they are collecting our data. And they are doing it, and they're analyzing our data in part to get to find undocumented immigrants, in part to figure out ways in which they feel like the system can be cut. And all along, when you looked at the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk and his people wanted data, but the cuts came from the impulse of the Project 2025 people, and that's Russell Vogt, who is at the director of the Office of Management and Budget. And he is just openly moving into that position now. So you're going to see more attempts to get rid of the federal bureaucracy and replace it with loyalists. You're going to see more attempts to cut programs that the Project 2025 Christian nationalists believe are promoting a secular government that they don't like, what they call liberal government. And that is still very much there. Please do not lose sight of that, because that's really, really important, that there is an agency that is analyzing our data all the time now. And that is a huge worry about people speaking up against this administration. All right. I would also like to point out another piece here that you didn't ask about, but that has jumped out to me. See, it's hard. I started out by saying it's hard to figure out what's going on. Here's all these pieces, but I think they add up to a couple of things. So another thing you didn't ask about, but I do want to call your attention to the fact that the Trump administration, especially with his guy at the Department of Justice, Ed Martin, has been pardoning criminals, convicted criminals, and is talking about pardoning more criminals. And at the same time, the Department of Justice, under Attorney General Pam Bondi and the administration, has been throwing into third country prisons people who have not been committed of crimes and have not even been charged with crimes, which is absolutely a violation of the Constitution. It's a violation of the Due Process Clause in the Constitution, which says that every person, not every citizen, every person has the right to due process. So you have this funny thing going on where they're pardoning convicted criminals and imprisoning people who have not been convicted of anything or charged with anything. And that's a deliberate attempt to destroy the rule of law. And you see this again with attacks on judges as well, and with the judges now speaking up and saying they need their own security system because they don't trust the Department of Justice any longer. That's going to be really important going forward, because one of the things that we know is authoritarians always go after the rule of law, and they lose when people turn out in the streets to protect the rule of law. So that's going to be something important to, like I say, it's going to be a rough summer. We're going to be wearing out a lot of shoe leather this summer. So you asked about another thing too. You asked about impeachment. And here's the issue with impeachment. All of what we are facing in this country is completely solvable. The framers put in the Constitution a way to take care of Donald Trump. Somebody said, what is he doing stuff that's illegal or unconstitutional? Yes. Yes, since day one. I mean, my head has been exploding since he got there and said he was going to impound the funds that Congress had appropriated for, at that point, USAID, because that's illegal. It's illegal under the 1974 Impoundment and Control Act, and it's illegal under the form of a system. It's unconstitutional under the system of our government. So, again, until I shouldn't give a date. As recently as 1974, the Republicans took a president who had broken laws and impeached that, or they passed, the House Judiciary Committee passed articles of impeachment, and the House said it was going to pass those articles of impeachment. And the senators actually went to Richard Nixon and said, we're going to convict you. You need to resign. That's how he resigned. That is what should be happening now. And it is not. The Republican Party is enabling this behavior. So one of the things that you asked is who is to blame for this moment? And I would say this belongs to the Republican Party. And again, this is, I wrote the history of the Republican Party. It was a grand party at one point. It was literally called the Grand Old Party. That's where we get GOP, the Grand Old Party. It is no longer. Now it is MAGA, and it's essentially a cult. It is MAGA, and those people are responsible for keeping Trump in office. And you asked, are they threatened? Yeah, I think probably some of them are. I think some of them are true believers. I think some of them are hoping he'll go away. And that's really important to remember, because what the Supreme Court is doing and what the Republicans are enabling is the creation of an extraordinarily strong president. And that's the idea of the Unitary Executive, which came into popularity under Reagan in the 1980s, when Republicans began to dislike the idea of elections. They started to not trust the people on the streets, because they tended to vote for Democrats, and they tended to vote for Social Security, and they tended to vote for programs that were good for a lot of people, when what they really wanted was tax cuts. What the Republicans really wanted was tax cuts, which, as we know, moved more than $50 trillion up from the bottom 90% to the top 1% between 1981 and 2021. That's what they wanted. So they started to back away from the idea of our constitutional system, which lets voters put in office a government to which they give their consent to live under. And in the 1980s, the Republicans began to argue for the concept of the Unitary Executive. And what that means is that because there are three distinct branches of government, they argue that no branches can check the president. He has control over the executive branch. And that means Congress can't oversee him and the courts can't oversee him. And that, by the way, even from George Washington on, presidents have always accepted congressional oversight because of the way our system was designed. They are supposed to do that. But the Unitary Executive theory says that the president doesn't have to answer to Congress or to the courts. And you saw this just last week when the Supreme Court said that Trump has the right, which is new, really new, to fire, I think, again, the precedent, I think, was 1935 off the top of my head. It's called Humphrey's Executor, has the right to fire the heads of independent agencies that have been created by Congress that he doesn't like, because those agencies are created in the executive branch. And so he can just get rid of those people. And the Supreme Court said he could do that. Now, it certainly seems as if the Supreme Court and the Republicans are taking a look at Trump and recognizing that he is seriously deteriorating right in front of our eyes, and just expecting that he's going to move off stage and they will get their fantasy Unitary Executive. Who that's going to be is not clear. I'm not sure J.D. Vance is their fantasy, but certainly is the fantasy of the 2025 people, and that sweeps in at least Samuel Alito and Justice Clarence Thomas. So that piece is moving as well. And that's the larger picture here is this idea of essentially creating what they call a unitary executive, but what is essentially a king, a dictator. And they prefer that than the idea of having people vote. And you can see this with the attacks on voting that we're going, this is one of the ways in which the court has pushed back against Trump. He wants to control voting in the United States. And the courts say, no, you can't do that. So, by the way, does our Constitution. All right, we're reaching the end here, and I want to leave you, after showing you that picture, now I want to leave you with some hope. I want to point out once again that Trump is not okay, and I'm pushing this idea, and a lot of other people are, but you don't need me to look at it. Listen to him. Look at the fact that the White House is no longer producing transcripts of his speeches because they're unhinged. And incidentally, if anybody wants to create those transcripts, here's how you do it. There is an app called Voice Memo. There may be others too. I use Voice Memo. You can literally hold it up to your laptop and record a speech, and it produces a transcript. Now, then you have to go back and check it again, but it's a really fast, easy way to get a transcript if you're interested in doing that. But they're simply not producing those things. They're really cleaning him up and trying to make him look better than he is. So as we're looking here at reasons to be hopeful, Trump is crumbling. And that does beg the question of who is actually making the decisions in the White House. And you've heard me speculate before that it is Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, making decisions about immigration, and that it is Russell Vought making the decisions about cuts. And for a while it was Elon Musk, but I think he's just out there grabbing data at this point. So there is that, and there is also the fact that the courts are standing up to Trump. And it's very much worth supporting your judges, supporting judges, and again, we're going to be marching for the rule of law. Universities are standing up. Lawyers are standing up. They're walking away from firms that cave to Trump and standing up against him. Corporations are standing up against him. There's a lot of resistance out there, but I want to talk about us today. And that's, I'm sorry, somebody just asked about the 25th. Trump set the 25th up very, very intelligently. You need the cabinet to 25th somebody, and this cabinet's not going to do that. As I just said, it's the Republicans who are responsible for this. Obviously, I'm not denying that the people actually doing the acting are responsible for their behavior, but the Senate and the House of Representatives could stop this at any moment. And they, instead of trying to stop it, they are encouraging it. Now, they may not do so once they get their tax cuts. That's a different kettle of fish. If you remember the last time around, once they'd gotten their tax cuts, they backed way off him. Maybe they'll do the same thing now. But I strongly urge you to call your senators, call your representatives, call anybody who is involved in any way with the government, and obviously, as usual, to work at the local level, at the state level, and at the national level, but also to do this, to make it really clear that this administration does not have popular support, and it does not. More people voted for somebody other than Trump than voted for him in 2024, and his popularity is underwater in every demographic at this point. So this sense that he is a juggernaut is in your head. It's not real. So one of the things that I would urge you to do is to stop listening to the people on social media who say it's all over, there's nothing we can do. That is deliberate. That is a deliberate way to try and undermine resistance. And you can see it. You can actually basically set your watch by it as these bots come out and trolls come out when it hits daylight in their country or wherever they're operating from. So forget that. But remember that we must all work together to defend democracy. And that means no freaking purity tests, man. We know this from any time people fight back against a dictator. You must work across party lines. Anybody who's willing to stand with you, you can disagree about everything. And I got to tell you, sometimes it just kills me whose voices I am amplifying. But in this moment, the same way they did in the 1850s, no purity, we just got to work together. And that's imperative wherever you are on the spectrum. And the funny thing is, on the other side of this, the same as after the Civil War, in the 1860s, a lot of people switched sides. They came out looking very different when they came out than they went in. And I've talked about that before, how Edwin Stanton, who was a Democrat and supported Lincoln only for the war, was so distraught at Lincoln's assassination that that his friends thought he was having a mental breakdown. He was just wandering around Washington, D.C., sobbing. So, we don't know what's going to be on the other side of this because the issues will all be different and the alliances will all be different, which is kind of cool, actually, if you think about it. So work with everybody, so long as they're working with democracy, working for democracy. And here's something that I've said before. This is about art as well as about being in the streets and so on. Really good artists, musicians, step up. This is your time. Posters, all that makes a huge difference. They catch people's eye. They spread messages. And also, one of the things that is a mistake is to focus only on the few ringleaders that are in the news all the time. They are supported by enablers. And there are in the House of Representatives and in the Senate a number of Republicans who are very vulnerable in an upcoming election. And there could be more even. Remember, Democrats have been overperforming by 12 points since the 2024 election. Those people, pulling those people out, pressuring those people, and also paying attention to the extraordinary corruption scandals, which somehow are getting a pass now, especially if there's a corruption scandal in your state. In Ohio, I'm looking at you. Montana, I'm looking at you. Florida, I'm looking at you. Texas, I'm looking at you. Mississippi, I could just keep on going. Mississippi, I'm looking at you. North Carolina, I'm looking at you. Did I say Florida? That's up there too. Those corruption scandals matter. And not necessarily the people at the top of the chain, but the people who've supported them. This has to be an across-the-board attempt to fight for our democracy. And there's so many of us. We just need to get that focus on how to do it. And as you do that, one of the things I keep saying is remember to think about what you want, what your issues are, and to speak up about those, because those coalitions will come together too as we go forward. And, people say they're mad that there isn't somebody articulating them right now. Actually, we've got a whole lot of people from across the spectrum articulating a lot of different ideas, and some I like and some I don't. And I suspect you feel the same way. We want a lot of ideas because from a lot of ideas, we will get a new vision of what this country can be. So speak up about that too. But in the meantime, as I say, it's going to be a long summer. It's going to be a hard summer. It's going to be confusing. You're going to feel overwhelmed. That's a tactic. Take a deep breath. Make sure you spend time with friends. And it's okay to take a break from this stuff so long as you come back energized. Sorry I ran over. I hope my new friend cuts it up. And I will see you. Today's only Tuesday. There you go. I'll see you Thursday. Thank you for being here.